All right, so this is chapter 22. Your textbook calls this chapter, I believe, Asian Transitions, which is a really kind of overly broad category. But it's acknowledging the fact that in this early modern era, we haven't really touched a lot on Asia specifically. We've talked a lot about, in chapters 16 and 17, how the Europeans are going all over the world, the Americas, Africa, Asian nations, and the impact that Europeans are having, but we haven't really gone back to places like China or Japan since chapter 12 and 13 back in the post-classical era. So this is kind of a catch you up chapter on what's been happening in these countries, with the idea being that this way you can have a better sense of what's been happening over time. One of the things that's been happening over time is the white folk have shown up. And so we need to do a quick run back through this questionably momentous event on the shores of Western India. The day that Vasco da Gama, who was from what country? Portugal. Shows up on the beach in Calcutta, or Calicut, and will kind of symbolize the beginning of some pretty dramatic change in Asia. So, if we take 30 seconds, if we are Vasco da Gama, what is our perception of the significance of this arrival? Nick?
They finally found a way around the Ottomans who were being violent to trade stuff. They weren't allowing them to trade through them to get to India.
Good. All right, so we've found this magical passageway around the Ottomans. Ottomans are up here, they're scary, they're Muslim, whatever. Portuguese are going all the way around Africa, which they weren't even sure was possible until they get to India. He steps off the boat, and it's like Neil Armstrong on the moon. This is a momentous event. How did he figure his appearance would be received? Not like physical appearance, but the fact that a white guy is showing up in India on his own. Did he feel this would be cause for celebration and parties and much merrymaking? Yeah, he did. Did he think this was the beginning of a long, beautiful friendship? Oh, yeah. Did he think he was going to have lots of success with trade? Oh, yeah. Did he think that he was showing up as an equally strong trading partner in this relationship? Oh, yeah. And was he expecting to have to make much of an adjustment? Oh, no. Oh, no. And now if we flip this around and we look at it from the perspective of the people that were in India, and now that we've gone through chapter 21, the people that were in India were the Mughals. How would the Mughals view this from a significance standpoint? Meh. It's a blip on the radar. Interesting. Maybe something that you might see on page 3 or 4 of the newspaper, but not front page headlines. Although since they didn't have newspapers, certainly not front page headlines. Is this an earth-shattering appearance? Not really. I mean, that's probably the most, similar reaction that they would have. I mean, seeing a European show up on his own was kind of impressive, because even the Mughals knew how far away Europe was and how backwards European technology was, and the fact that Tarina's still texting a lot. I love that these are recorded. So the Mughals would probably be a little bit surprised at seeing a white person there. Are they expecting this is going to be the beginning of a long, beautiful friendship? Not really. Probably not thinking much of it at all. Are they expecting to trade a great deal with Europeans? Well, yes and no. Yes, they're expecting the Europeans to trade a lot for their stuff, for Mughal stuff. But are the Mughals expecting to get a lot of European goods? No, why not? Because Europeans don't have much.
I read something earlier that said the Mughals actually really like European painting. Is that true?
As time goes on, yes. Once the real strength of the Renaissance transformation takes place, Yeah, Europeans are going to produce some pretty cool art, and not just paintings, but sculptures as well. So there will be the occasional trade good that is desirable, but there's no easily mass-produced trade good that the Europeans can offer. Do the Mughals view the Europeans, or the Portuguese at least, as being equally strong? No. Are the Mughals expecting some sort of period of adjustment? Not really.
They don't expect adjustment?
No, because they don't really think much of this.
Wow, he made it across the house.
Right. Good for him. From the European standpoint, though, trade is obviously one of the huge things they're hoping to accomplish. But there is a secondary goal. And the secondary goal has to do with religion. So, goal number one, trade. Make ridiculous sums of money. Finally able to get their hands on these Asian products that are so desirable back in Europe. Products like what?
Silk.
Spices, silk, porcelain. Tarina?
By Asia, are you talking about India and China, or?
Yes, India and China. But the secondary goal is to spread the teachings of Christianity. For Europeans, these are inseparable. Their religion goes where they go. For them, it's not an option to just go and trade and not spread their faith. Their view of their faith dictates that wherever they go, they attempt to convince people not only to trade with them, but to join their religion. For the Europeans, they're going to view anybody who hasn't already been exposed to Christianity as a heathen. Somebody practicing a religion that's just simply not true. Well, they're going to have a very convenient perspective on Islam. Because Muslims do not venerate Christ, they are not going to view Islam as a valid religion. Because to Christians, Christ is the whole point.
So was it a similarity to Judaism at that point?
Yeah. Yeah. And especially given all the conflicts that especially the Portuguese and the Spanish had with the Moors, the Muslims that had conquered across from North Africa and claimed much of Spain and Portugal, that's really going to leave a bad taste in the mouths of the Portuguese and the Spanish to Muslim kingdoms. Tarina?
If the Muslims looked at the Jews and Christians as people on both sides of the
Because the Muslims were more tolerant. Nick, you had a question?
Yeah. Was that reason why that the Muslims didn't venerate Christ? Was that the same reason that there was so much anti-Semitism in Europe because the Jews didn't venerate Christ as well?
Yeah, that has a lot to do with it. Emily? For the purposes of this conversation, yeah, heathen just means non-Christian. That's how it's kind of like when we look back at the Greeks, the word barbarian was really just meant to describe anybody that didn't speak Greek. We've since used barbarian to mean any number of other things. For the Christians at this point, heathen is just anybody who's not a Christian. We now typically view it, if you look at the picture, as people that haven't been exposed to any major religion. But at the time, these Christian priests that were coming from Spain and Portugal would probably equally view a Hindu, a Muslim, and somebody still worshiping natural spirits all equally as heathens.
What about someone who just didn't really care for religion?
Well, heathen usually indicates somebody who believes in something and it's just not what they believe. So if you didn't believe in anything, that probably wouldn't make you a heathen per se, but I'm not sure they would have quibbled over the finer points of that. They probably would have just dumped them in with everybody else. Are we good here? Okay. But really we want to talk about trade first. So when Europeans are first breaking into the Indian Ocean, they're kind of focusing on three distinct zones of trade. The first zone is going to be the east coast of Africa, all the way up to the Arabian Peninsula. So all of this is going to be classified as the quote-unquote Arab zone. The second area that they're interested in trading is the Indian zone, which is primarily focused on India, hence the name. And then the third one being the Chinese zone, where you get the coastal trading cities of eastern China. Each one of these areas has different products, all of them very desirable by the Europeans. So in the Arab zone, you would get all of the wonderful textiles and glass from the Ottoman Empire. And then working your way down the East African coast, you would get ivory, you would get all these exotic animal hides that Europeans didn't have, like leopards and giraffes and zebras and ivory from the rhinoceros and the elephant. All of these things were very, very desirable by European elites. People would pay a lot of money to get their hands on this stuff. Which means if you're a merchant and you can go pick it up and bring it back, you're going to make a lot of money. Alia?
Did they go to Australia yet?
Good question. No, nobody is going to Australia yet. So really don't worry too much about Australia at this point. That's not going to be happening realistically until about the 1700s. David?
I'm just kind of curious about what makes up the ivory on elephants or rhinoceros. Is it just some sort of material that wouldn't harm them if you cut it off at a point where it didn't prevent their skin?
Yes and no. I mean, for both the rhinoceros and the elephant, the tusk, which is right. I mean, they're used in their daily life as defense, and so removing those does deprive them of one of their best defensive abilities. Does it kill them simply by removing it? No.
Where there would be some base of it left.
Right.
Okay. So it's kind of like I don't know how to compare it, but it's nothing like if it were taken into captivity after having it removed at the base, it wouldn't be of any detriment to it.
Not right. Right. If you leave it in the wild without the horn, if there was some way to capture it, remove it, and set it free, you would probably have sentenced it to death.
It's like someone would cut it but not harmed it, and then it was ready.
Right.
Then it would drag you fine.
Right.
Okay. Just wanted to get a better grasp on the
No problem. All right, so in the Indian zone, you've got cotton as the major product, again, spices as well, and then in the Chinese zone, paper, porcelain, silk, and a variety of other things too. Interesting thing about this entire area in terms of the trade that was already going on before the Europeans show up. It's what we call passive trade. Now, by passive, what we mean is there was no corporation or corporations in charge of trade. There was no Chinese company whose sole job was to trade. There was no forceful trade. You didn't have to sail around with gunships and armed guards and things like that. There was no organized piracy. And for the most part, there was no common currency. So when you traded across any of these zones, you were exchanging goods for other goods. You weren't selling them for cash or gold coins or silver coins or anything else. It was a barter system. I trade my spices for cotton, and I take my cotton someplace else, and I trade that for porcelain. And I'm simply trying to increase my quantities of each by getting a good value.
and then going back and getting it more.
Right. And so this is being done by independent merchants. This isn't a centralized business system. There are no companies that are running this. And this is a problem for the Portuguese. It's a problem for Europeans in general because this is how they function. They function with rules, and they function with guidelines, and they function with people in charge. And so when the Portuguese show up and there's no trade guild in charge of the Indian Ocean, nobody for them to go talk to and get permission to trade or bully and threaten, they don't know what to do. There's no common currency, so they can't get their hands on a common currency, and their trade goods suck, and nobody wants to barter with them. So they're not really sure how to break into this Indian Ocean trade. Nick?
About the piracy thing, I've read something about Marco Polo that said that there were groups of pirates operating there who would raid ships.
Yep. But there's nothing organized in terms of like, entire populations of pirates all working jointly together. There are small independent bands just like there were bandits throughout the countryside, where every once in a while you might get accosted. But much like the trade itself doesn't have any central organization, the pirates don't have any central organization. So this really is just a series of individuals all going about their lives trying to make money in whatever way they choose. So yeah, not to say that there are no pirates, but that the pirates, much like the merchants, are all acting independently. Right. But as much as this confuses the Portuguese at first, they actually come to find out after a little bit that this presents amazing opportunities. Because if there's nobody in charge of the Indian Ocean trade, and the Portuguese say, hijack a ship, is there any large entity that's going to come after them? No. If they say, hijack 10 ships, all from different cities or countries, is anybody going to come after them? None at all. And so what originally looks like an obstacle, a barrier for European trade, actually ends up being opportunities. There is no one in charge of this, which means the Portuguese feel like they can put themselves in charge of this. Well, they can begin to exert some influence. And so what you're going to see is that there are a few natural, what we call choke points across the Indian Ocean. Places where you could go and control trade because of the geography. So let's say that you happen to have several ships with cannons.
There's a point you could cross near Egypt and between the Arabian Peninsula and the Mediterranean.
By land.
Oh, land, okay.
Yeah. But if you were wanting to trade with Mecca and the rest of the Indian Ocean, if you just so happen to put, a couple ships with cannons right there, anybody coming in and out is going to have to go past you. And let's say you quickly developed a reputation for being, a little trigger happy. The people coming through that place would probably start to do what? Give you something. They would start to pay you to not shoot at them. No, if you shoot at them anyway, then people would start to fight back. But if you just pay a toll, essentially, pay a little protection money, you're good. Same thing happens here on the east side of the Arabian Peninsula. Same thing happens here as you're running through some of the Spice Islands.
And just luckily those choke points are on the edges where someone has to go through India to reach it.
Right. So again, Europeans realize, especially the Portuguese at first, that because there's nobody in charge, and because there is no significant centralized military presence, if they want to rough up a few people, if they want to steal some goods, it's not like the Chinese military is suddenly going to descend on them, because China doesn't run the trade. So what this is going to lead to is European control. Now, the first one, and this is the only one we're going to talk about today, and so we'll pause here after we talk about trade companies. This is going to be one of the most common forms of European control. First the Portuguese, and then later the Dutch, the British, the French will set up a corporation to oversee trade in the Indian Ocean. And here's the logic behind it. What's easier? Taking your ship from Portugal to the Indian Ocean, then having to go home again at some point? Or having a base of operations in the Indian Ocean, someplace where you can go and get supplies and ammunition and new sailors and all those things? Which one makes more sense? Which one's going to allow you to profit more and to work more efficiently? Having to go home all the time or being able to stay in the Indian Ocean? Being able to stay. It's a no-brainer. And so what they're going to do is establish fortified trading towns along the coast. They're going to put up a wall. They're going to line it with cannons. They're going to staff enough people there that they can defend it in case somebody tries to take it away. Most of the time, the natives, the people in India or China or the islands or whatever, are going to decide it's just not worth the hassle to try to kick them out. And from there, the Europeans can slowly expand their power and influence.
When did India get into the
I think it was in the 1920s. That could be it too. I'm a little rusty with my dates.
Okay, well that's when you said they're after the First and Second World War.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was after the Second World War.
Yeah, I think you're right, Nick. All right, so trade companies are going to be one of the most direct forms of control. Europeans directly using their military power to get what they want, which is access to the wealth in Asia. These other two systems are going to be a little bit more passive, a little bit more indirect, slightly less violent, but again, all hoping to accomplish the same goal, which is to get the Europeans what they want. And so that's what we're going to pick up next time.